Don't move. Watch out. Daniel, why? Joyce, in this life, I've repaid every debt I owed you. In the next life, please, let me and Mira find peace. Daniel, even at death's door, she was the only one in your heart. Daniel, Daniel and I, we hated each other most. He hated me for manipulating fate, for forcing Mira, my father's fragile adopted daughter, to marry into the Korean Mafia. I hated him for marrying me while keeping someone else locked in his heart. What if the person you destroyed came back to haunt every breath you took? What if the man you loved whispered another woman's name as he died in your arms? Subscribe to find out if Joyce can rewrite a fate soaked in blood. The wedding dress was white, but Myra's face was gray. Joyce remembered that day with perfect clarity. The day she signed another woman's death warrant with her father's pen and her own ambition. Mira had begged on her knees in the family study, tears streaming down her cheeks, hands clutching at Joyce's designer heels. Please, Joyce, please don't make me go. They'll kill me. You know they will. Joyce had looked down at her then, this fragile adopted sister who had stolen every ounce of their father's love and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. You should have thought about that before you made Dad love you more than his own daughter. The Park family needs a bride. You're going. The wedding happened 3 days later. Mira walked down that aisle like a lamb to slaughter, and Joyce stood in the back wearing black, feeling victorious. Daniel hadn't come. He'd refused to watch. That should have been her first warning. 2 weeks. That's all it took for the screaming to start. The calls came at midnight. Myra's voice raw and broken, begging for help that would never come. Joyce, please. He's hurting me. He put out cigarettes on my skin. He says I'm not worthy of the Park name because I'm illegitimate. Please, tell Dad to bring me home. Joyce had hung up every time, until the calls stopped coming altogether. When they found Myra's body in the Han River, even the hardened detectives had turned away. The coroner's report listed 43 broken bones, evidence of prolonged torture, and signs of starvation. Min Jae Park had kept her alive for entertainment, then discarded her like trash when he discovered the truth, that the Williams family had sent him an illegitimate daughter instead of their true heir. The war started immediately. The Park Mafia tore through the Williams empire like wildfire through paper. Businesses burned. Associates disappeared. Family members were executed in the streets as warnings. And Daniel, who had loved Mira since they were children, blamed Joyce for every drop of blood spilled. You killed her, he'd said on their wedding night, standing on opposite sides of a bedroom that felt like a tomb. The marriage had been arranged by their dying parents, a desperate attempt to unite their failing families. You sent an innocent girl to hell because you were jealous. I will never forgive you. I will never love you. 5 years of marriage felt like 5 lifetimes in purgatory. They lived in the same house, but existed in different dimensions of grief and hatred. Daniel worked endless hospital shifts to avoid coming home. When he did return, he'd sit in Myra's old room, holding her photographs, crying silent tears that accused Joyce louder than any words could. Joyce had tried everything to make him see her. She learned to cook his favorite meals. She waited up for him every night. She memorized his schedule, his preferences, his dreams. But a man's heart that belongs to a ghost has no room for the living. The massacre came on their 5th anniversary. The Park family had finally located them in their safe house outside Seoul. Joyce heard the gunfire first, then the screaming. She'd been in the garden, ironically planting white roses, Myra's favorite flowers, another pathetic attempt to earn forgiveness from a man who would never grant it. Daniel had grabbed her hand and run. For the first time in 5 years, he'd touched her voluntarily. They'd almost made it to the car when the shot rang out. Time slowed. Joyce saw the sniper's rifle glint in the moonlight, saw the trajectory, saw death coming for her with mathematical precision. Then Daniel stepped in front of her. The bullet meant for her heart found his instead. He'd crumpled into her arms, blood blooming across his white shirt like a grotesque flower. Joyce screamed his name, pressed her hands against the wound, begged him to hold on, promised him everything, anything, if he would just stay. But his eyes were already glazing over, focused on something beyond her shoulder, something only he could see. Mira, he whispered, blood on his lips. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm coming now. Wait for me. Not Joyce. Not the woman holding him as he died. Not the wife who had loved him desperately through 5 years of hatred. Mira. Always Mira. He died with another woman's name in his mouth and left Joyce alone in a pool of his blood. The Park family soldiers found her there an hour later, still holding his body, covered in blood that wasn't hers but should have been. Min-jae Park himself had come to finish the job, a tall man with dead eyes and tattoos mapping every life he'd taken. "You sent me a fake bride," he'd said, pressing the gun to her forehead. "You insulted my family. You started a war." Any last words? Joyce had looked up at him with empty eyes. "I deserve this." The last thing she remembered was the gunshot, the pain, and the overwhelming relief that it was finally over. She died alone on the same ground where Daniel had sacrificed himself for her, not out of love, but out of guilt and duty. She died hated by the only man she'd ever loved. She died haunted by the ghost of the woman she'd murdered. She died knowing she'd destroyed everyone who had ever mattered. Then she woke up in her childhood bedroom, 28 years old again, with tears streaming down her face and one thought burning in her mind. "I can change this, I can save them all, even if it costs me everything." The past is written in blood, but the future is still blank. Can Joyce rewrite fate, or will some sins be too deep to wash away? Subscribe now, because the woman who destroyed everything is about to sacrifice herself to save it all, and the man who hated her will only understand when it's too late. When you wake up with the memory of your own death, do you run from fate or straight into its arms? Joyce has 3 months to choose who lives and who dies. Subscribe to see if redemption requires the ultimate sacrifice. Joyce's eyes snapped open to sunlight streaming through familiar cream curtains, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her hands flew to her chest. No bullet wound. No blood. She gasped, choking on air that tasted impossibly sweet because it meant she was alive. Her bedroom. Her childhood bedroom with the vintage vanity and the framed photo of her mother on the nightstand. The digital clock read March 15th, 2024. 3 months before the wedding announcement. 3 months before she'd forced Mira into that doomed marriage. 3 months before everything had spiraled into a hell that ended with Daniel's blood on her hands and a bullet in her brain. She stumbled to the mirror, pressed shaking hands against the glass. 28 years old. Smooth brown skin unmarred by 5 years of misery. Eyes that hadn't yet watched the man she loved die whispering another woman's name. She was whole again, alive again, and she knew exactly how this story ended. Joyce sank to the floor, wrapped her arms around her knees, and let the memories crash over her like a tsunami. Myra screams on the phone. The coroner's report. Daniel's hatred burning cold and constant. The gunfire. The blood. The way Min-jae Park's eyes had held nothing but death when he'd pulled that trigger. Someone had to marry into the Park family. The business alliance was already in motion, contracts signed, debts called in. Her father would sacrifice someone to save the Williams empire. He always did. In her past life, she'd manipulated him into choosing Mira. This time, he'd do it naturally because Mira was the adopted daughter, the expendable one, the girl who meant nothing to the family name. Unless Joyce stopped it. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Daniel. "Morning, Joyce. Are you coming to the hospital volunteer event today? Mira really wants to see you." Fresh pain lanced through her chest. He didn't hate her yet. In this timeline, they were still childhood friends bound by their mother's deathbed promises. He still smiled at her, still included her, still treated her like someone who mattered. But he loved Mira. He'd always loved Mira. That was the one constant across every timeline, every life, every possibility. Joyce stood, walked to her closet, and pulled out the black dress she'd worn to Myra's funeral. She held it against her body, stared at her reflection, and made a choice that felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. She would volunteer to marry Min-jae Park herself. She would walk into that hell with her eyes open, knowing exactly what awaited her. She would give Daniel to Mira, give her father the heir he deserved, give everyone she loved a chance to survive. She would become the sacrifice instead of the murderer. Because this time, the monster wouldn't be the man who tortured his bride to death. The monster would be the devil who married him willingly. And maybe, just maybe, if she paid the price with her own blood instead of someone else's, she could finally earn the redemption that had died with her in that previous life. Joyce picked up her phone and texted back, "I'll be there. We need to talk." 3 months. She had 3 months to orchestrate her own execution and make everyone believe it was their idea. The game had begun. Joyce has chosen her path to hell. But can she walk it without breaking? And will Daniel realize what she's sacrificing before it's too late to stop her? Subscribe now, because the countdown to the wedding has started, and this time, the bride knows exactly how much her choice will cost. Joyce watched Daniel and Mira from across the hospital garden, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She'd positioned herself here deliberately, hidden behind the cherry blossom tree where she could observe without being seen. Daniel was teaching Mira how to properly bandage a wound on a volunteer patient, his hands gentle and patient, his smile soft in a way he'd never smiled at Joyce. This was the moment. In her past life, Joyce had interrupted this scene, pulled Daniel away for a family emergency, and destroyed the natural connection blooming between them. Today, she stayed hidden and let love grow without her poison. Her phone buzzed. Her father, emergency board meeting. The Park family contacted us about the alliance. Get home now. Joyce's heart hammered against her ribs. It was starting. She had maybe 2 hours before her father decided which daughter to sacrifice. In the original timeline, he'd chosen Mira after Joyce had planted seeds about Myra's willingness to serve the family and her own indispensability to the business. This time, she needed to reverse that script perfectly. She found her father in his study, whiskey already poured, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. Joyce, sit down. We need to discuss something difficult. The Park Alliance. She kept her voice steady, businesslike. I heard the contract requires a marriage. He looked surprised that she knew. The Parks are demanding a bride within 3 months. It's the only way to secure the trade routes and clear our family's debts to them. His eyes flickered with something like shame. I'm considering asking Mira. She has no prospects elsewhere, and no. Joyce set down her coffee with deliberate calm. Send me instead. Her father's glass stopped halfway to his lips. What? Mira is adopted, Dad. Illegitimate. The Parks will see that as an insult, sending them a girl with no real blood ties to our family. Joyce leaned forward, channeling every business lesson he'd ever taught her. I'm your legitimate heir. Your eldest daughter. Sending me shows respect. It shows we value this alliance. Joyce, you don't understand what you're volunteering for. Minjae Park is dangerous, violent, unpredictable. I know. She met his eyes without flinching. But I also know business. If we send Mira and they discover she's illegitimate, they'll consider it a betrayal. They'll come for all of us. The truth of her past life weighted every word. Send me, and we have a real chance at peace. Her father studied her face, searching for the real reason behind her offer. Joyce had practiced this expression in the mirror for hours. Calm, rational, dutiful. The perfect corporate daughter making a strategic sacrifice. What about Daniel? He asked quietly. Everyone knows you've loved him since you were children. The pain was real, but Joyce had learned to weaponize her own heartbreak. Daniel loves Mira. He always has. I've been holding on to something that was never mine. She smiled, and it felt like swallowing glass. Let them be together. They deserve happiness. And I deserve to be useful to this family in a way that matters. She watched him process it, his ambitious daughter finally putting family duty above personal desire. He didn't know she was signing her own death warrant. He thought she was being noble. Are you absolutely certain? His voice cracked slightly. Joyce, once this is done, I'm certain. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and prepared to walk out of his office as a condemned woman. Draw up the contracts. I'll marry Minjae Park. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Don't tell Daniel or Mira until after the announcement. Let them have a few more weeks of peace. Let them fall in love without guilt. Let Daniel have the happiness she could never give him. Let her final gift be their freedom. Her father nodded, and Joyce left before he could see the tears threatening to fall. She'd just volunteered for hell, pushed the man she loved into another woman's arms, and sentenced herself to a marriage that would likely end in torture and death. But Mira would live. Daniel would live. Her family would survive. And maybe, in some twisted way, that was enough. Joyce has sealed her fate with her father's signature, but the hardest part is still ahead. Watching Daniel fall in love with Mira while knowing she orchestrated it all. Subscribe now, because the guillotine is built, the blade is raised, and the woman beneath it is the only one who knows what's coming. The Park family compound rose from the Seoul hillside like a beautiful nightmare, all traditional architecture hiding modern horrors. Joyce stepped out of the black car in her wedding dress, white silk against her dark skin, and felt like a ghost attending her own funeral. No family had come with her. Her father claimed it was protocol. She knew it was abandonment. The wedding ceremony had been sterile, transactional, witnessed by lawyers instead of loved ones. Min Jae Park had spoken his vows in Korean without looking at her once. Now he walked 3 steps ahead through corridors lined with armed men, his tailored suit hiding the tattoos she knew covered his skin, a map of every life he'd taken. He led her to a bedroom that felt more like an interrogation room. Hardwood floors, minimal furniture, and on the center table, gleaming under cold light, a loaded gun. Min Jae finally turned to face her, and Joyce understood why Mira had broken so quickly in the past life. His eyes were beautiful and completely dead, like looking into the eyes of a shark. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with sharp features and an aura of casual violence that made her survival instincts scream. "Sit down, Joyce Williams." His English was perfect, accent slight, tone glacial. "Let's discuss your life expectancy." Joyce sat, keeping her spine straight, hands folded in her lap. She would not shake. She would not beg. She'd died once already. What was one more death? Min Jae picked up the gun, checked the chamber with practiced ease, then set it between them like a centerpiece. "I did my research on your family. Your father sent me his legitimate daughter. Impressive. But I don't trust impressive gestures." He leaned back, studying her like a specimen. "So here's your wedding night test. Prove you're not a liability, or you won't survive the week." "Define liability." Joyce's voice came out steady. "Miracle. Someone who cries. Someone who begs. Someone who tries to run or call for help or play the victim." His smile was razor thin. "My last potential bride screamed for 3 hours before I sent her home. The one before that tried to stab me. I respected that more, but she still failed." He tapped the gun. "You're a Black American woman married into a Korean crime family. You'll face racism, violence, and tests designed to break you. If you're weak, you're useless. If you're useless, you're dead." Joyce remembered Myra's broken body. Remembered the coroner's report detailing 43 fractures. This was the man who'd done that, and would do it again if she showed fear. "I'm not weak," she said quietly. "I didn't come here blind. I knew what you were when I walked through your door. I chose this marriage to save my family, and I'll survive it the same way." She met his dead eyes without flinching. "Test me however you want, Min Jae. I won't break." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, or curiosity. He picked up the gun, aimed it casually at her chest. Not even now. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might explode, but Joyce didn't move. "Pulling that trigger starts a war you don't need. You married me for the trade routes and the alliance. Killing me makes that worthless." She paused. "Besides, if you wanted me dead, you'd have done it already. This is just you trying to scare me." The silence stretched like pulled wire. Then Min Jae lowered the gun and laughed. Short, sharp, entirely without humor. "Maybe you'll last longer than I thought." He stood, walked to the door, then looked back. "Welcome to the Park family, Mrs. Park. Try not to die in your sleep." He left her alone in that cold room with the gun still on the table, and Joyce finally let herself shake. She'd survived night 1. Only a lifetime of nights left to go. Joyce passed the first test, but Min Jae Park has 1,000 more ways to break her. Can she survive a marriage where every day is psychological warfare? Subscribe now, because the devil just met a woman who refuses to burn, and he's starting to wonder why. Joyce learned the Park compound's rhythms within 48 hours. Guards changed shifts at 6. Min Jae held business meetings in the East Wing every morning. His second-in-command, a man named June, hated her on sight but respected hierarchy. And every evening at 8, someone in the organization needed medical attention they couldn't get at a hospital. That's where she found her opening. The third night, she was walking past the medical room when she heard cursing in Korean and the smell of blood. She pushed open the door without permission, a calculated risk. Inside, June was trying to stitch up a young gang member's knife wound, doing it badly, thread bunching. The kid sweating and pale from pain and infection risk. "You're going to kill him," Joyce said in English, then repeated it in broken Korean she'd been studying obsessively. "Let me." June's hand went to his gun. "Mrs. Park, you should return to your room. I grew up watching surgical procedures." Not a lie. Daniel had taught her during all those hospital volunteer sessions she'd attended to be near him. That wound needs proper cleaning, antibiotics, and stitches at the correct depth or he'll get sepsis and die. Your choice. Let me help or explain to Min Jae why you lost a soldier to incompetence. She saw the calculation in Jun's eyes, saw him weighing his pride against practicality. Finally, he stepped aside. Joyce worked efficiently, hands steady despite her racing heart. She cleaned the wound properly, applied antibiotic ointment, stitched with the precision Daniel had drilled into her during those long afternoons she'd treasured. The young gang member's breathing stabilized, color returning to his face. Where did you learn this? June asked quietly. Someone I loved was a surgeon. He taught me that medicine doesn't care about politics, only about saving lives. She tied off the final stitch. Your organization bleeds like everyone else. I can help with that, or I can stay locked in that room being useless. Your boss values utility. Word reached Min Jae within the hour. He found her in the library, the only place she felt remotely safe, studying Korean business contracts and medical texts simultaneously. You stitched up Lee. Not a question. He stood in the doorway, unreadable as always. June was doing it wrong. Lee would have died. Joyce didn't look up from her book. You can punish me for overstepping, or you can use me. I have medical knowledge, business training, and I speak 3 languages. I can manage communications with your American contacts, translate cultural nuances your team misses, and apparently keep your soldiers from dying of preventable infections. Why would you help the organization that's holding you hostage? Now she looked up, met those shark eyes directly. Because being useful keeps me alive. Because sitting in that room waiting to die makes me lose my mind. Because if I'm going to be here, I might as well do something that matters. She paused. And because despite what you think, I don't want your people to suffer unnecessarily. Medicine isn't about sides, it's about healing. Min Jae studied her for a long moment, and Joyce held her breath. This was the gamble. Prove she was valuable enough to keep, invested enough to trust marginally, but not so eager that he'd suspect ulterior motives. Fine, he said finally. You'll assist with medical issues and handle American communications. But Joyce, if you betray me, if you try to use this access to contact your family or escape, I'll make what happened to previous brides look merciful. Understood. Understood. He left, and Joyce released the breath she'd been holding. She'd bought herself time, purpose, and access. She'd made herself valuable. Now she just had to stay alive long enough for it to matter. Joyce has turned her prison into a purpose, but Min Jae is watching her every move. Can usefulness evolve into trust? Or is she just delaying the inevitable? Subscribe now, because the monster is starting to see her as more than prey, and that might be the most dangerous position of all. The assassination attempt came during a business dinner with the Choi Syndicate, 6 weeks into Joyce's marriage. She was translating contract terms between Min Jae and the Choi underboss when she noticed the server's hands shaking, the way his eyes avoided everyone at the table, the bulge under his jacket positioned wrong for a concealed phone. Joyce's hand found Min Jae's under the table, squeezed once, their agreed signal for danger. She didn't stop talking, didn't change her tone, just kept translating while her heart hammered. The Choi family agrees to the territory split, but they want assurance that. The server pulled a gun. Min Jae moved like lightning, flipping the table, pulling Joyce down as gunfire erupted. She felt bullets whiz past her head, heard screaming, tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Min Jae covered her body with his, returning fire with his free hand, and Joyce realized with startling clarity that he was protecting her. When the smoke cleared and the Choi trader lay dead, Min Jae pulled Joyce to her feet, scanning her for injuries. You signaled me. How did you know? His hands were shaking, but his eyes were determined. That's not nervousness, that's adrenaline before violence. Joyce brushed glass from her dress, hands remarkably steady considering she'd almost died. Also, servers in establishments like this are trained not to show emotion. He was performing fear badly. Min Jae stared at her, something shifting in those dead eyes. Most people would have frozen, or screamed. You read the threat and responded tactically. Panic gets you killed. Strategy keeps you breathing. She met his gaze. I told you I wasn't weak. The next attempt came a week later. Poison in her tea during a solo lunch. Joyce smelled the bitter almond scent, recognized cyanide from her medical studies, and calmly set the cup down without drinking. She called Min Jae directly. Someone just tried to poison me. Send someone to test the tea before you dismiss this. He arrived within minutes, had the tea analyzed, found the cyanide. Then he executed the kitchen staff member responsible in front of the entire household. Joyce watched without flinching, understanding the message. She was under his protection now. Why didn't you drink it? Min-jae asked later, in the library where they'd begun having nightly discussions about business strategy. Because I learned to recognize poisons when I was studying medicine. Because I don't trust easily. Because survival is a skill I've cultivated. Joyce turned a page in her Korean textbook. You're wondering why I'm not falling apart. Every other woman who's entered this family broke within days. I'm not every other woman. She finally looked at him. I came here knowing what you were, Min-jae. I chose this marriage fully aware of the consequences. I don't need you to be gentle or kind. I need you to recognize that I'm competent, useful, and not going anywhere. Something dark and complicated crossed his face. Not quite respect, not quite curiosity, but something between. He moved closer, invaded her space in a way that should have felt threatening, but somehow didn't. You're not afraid of me. I'm terrified of you. Joyce corrected quietly. I'm just better at hiding it than most. Fear and function aren't mutually exclusive. Min-jae reached out, tucked a lock behind her ear, his first voluntary gentle touch. I'm starting to understand why your father sent you instead of keeping you safe. Joyce's heart twisted. He thought she was valuable. He thought her family cherished her enough to use her strategically. He didn't know she'd volunteered for this execution, that her father had let her go without a fight. She stepped back, rebuilt the emotional distance. Don't mistake utility for affection, Min-jae. We're business partners in a very permanent contract. Nothing more. But as he left, Joyce caught the look on his face and realized she'd made a critical miscalculation. Min-jae Park was starting to care. And a monster who cares is infinitely more dangerous than one who simply hates. Joyce survived the assassins. But can she survive Min-jae's growing fascination? And what happens when the man she planned to endure starts becoming the man she might understand? Subscribe now, because respect is turning into something neither of them planned. And back home, Daniel is about to discover the truth that will destroy him. Daniel found the first clue by accident. A text message on Myra's phone while she slept beside him, 3 months into their relationship that had bloomed so naturally he'd thought it was fate. The message was from Joyce's father. The contracts are finalized. Joyce leaves for Seoul next week. You've gotten everything you wanted. His hands shook as he scrolled up, finding months of messages he'd never known existed. Mira thanking Mr. Williams for handling Joyce. Mira expressing relief that she finally agreed to go instead of me. Mira celebrating that Daniel will never have to know what Joyce did for us. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He carefully set the phone down, slipped out of bed, and drove to the Williams estate at 3 in the morning. He found Joyce's father in his study, drunk and haunted looking. Where is Joyce? Daniel's voice was barely controlled. The real story. Now. Mr. Williams looked up with red-rimmed eyes. She's married. Seoul. The Park Family Alliance. Joyce was supposed to marry me. Our parents arranged it. What happened? She volunteered to take Myra's place. The older man poured another drink. Came to me with a business case for why sending her was strategically superior. I thought she was finally putting duty above emotion. I didn't realize, his voice cracked. I didn't realize she was sacrificing herself so Mira wouldn't have to die. Daniel felt the room tilt. Die. The Park family has a reputation. Min-jae Park tortures his brides. None of them last long. Mr. Williams looked ancient suddenly. I told her the risks. She said she knew. She said she'd rather it be her than Mira. She made me promise not to tell you until after she left. The words hit Daniel like physical blows. Joyce had known. She'd known exactly what she was walking into, and she'd chosen it anyway. She'd pushed him toward Mira, orchestrated their relationship, volunteered for execution, all so they could be happy. How long has she been there? Daniel could barely speak through the rage and guilt choking him. 3 months. 3 months. Joyce had been surviving hell for 3 months, while Daniel had been falling in love with Mira, exactly as Joyce had planned. He remembered their last conversation, her strange calmness, the way she'd said, I hope your wish comes true, like a goodbye. He'd thought she was being dramatic. She'd been saying farewell before walking into torture. Daniel stood, grabbed the desk for balance. I'm bringing her home. You can't. The Park family. I don't care about the Park family. Daniel's voice rose to a shout. Joyce sacrificed herself because of me. Because I was too blind to see that she loved me. Too selfish to notice what she was doing. too focused on Mira to realize Joyce was destroying herself to make me happy. He pulled out his phone, started making calls. His family had connections, resources, money. He'd burn it all to get Joyce back. He'd start a war if necessary. The first call went to his family's lawyer. I need information on the Park crime family in Seoul. Everything. Weaknesses, enemies, financial vulnerabilities. The second call went to a private security firm. I need extraction specialists. Someone is being held hostage in South Korea. I don't care what it costs. The third call was to Mira, who answered sleepily. Daniel? It's 4 in the morning. Did you know? His voice was cold. Did you know Joyce took your place? That she volunteered to marry into the Mafia so you wouldn't have to? Silence. Then, quietly, yes. How long have you known? Since the beginning. She made me promise not to tell you. She said you deserved to be happy, that you'd always loved me, that this was her choice. Myra's voice broke. Daniel, I didn't realize how bad it would be for her. I thought maybe she'd be okay, that maybe. Daniel hung up. He couldn't hear her justifications, her excuses, her guilt that came 3 months too late to matter. Joyce was in Seoul, married to a monster, surviving God knew what horrors, all because she'd loved him enough to give him everything, including her own life. And he'd taken it without question, without even noticing she was gone. He had 3 months of torture to make up for. He had a woman to save. And he had a love he'd finally recognized at exactly the wrong time. Daniel grabbed his passport and started packing. Seoul was 14 hours away. Joyce had survived 3 months. She just needed to survive a little longer. He was coming. Consequences be damned. Daniel has finally seen the truth, but 3 months too late. Can he reach Joyce before her sacrifice becomes permanent? And what happens when he crashes into her new life, threatening the fragile survival she's built? Subscribe now, because the man who loved her too late is about to collide with the monster who learned to love her just in time, and Joyce is caught between 2 impossible choices. The Park family's quarterly business dinner was held in their main compound, with representatives from allied syndicates across Asia. Joyce stood beside Min Jae in a black dress that whispered power, translating negotiations, managing cultural tensions, playing the role she'd carved for herself. She'd survived 4 months now. 4 months of tests and threats, and slowly earning something that looked almost like belonging. Then the doors burst open and Daniel walked in like vengeance incarnate. Joyce's heart stopped. He looked terrible, haunted, desperate, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't hide the barely contained violence in his posture. Behind him stood 6 private security contractors in tactical gear, and the entire room erupted into chaos. Guns drawn, shouting in 3 languages. Min Jae's hand found his weapon, his body shifting to shield Joyce even as his eyes promised murder. Joyce, Daniel's voice cut through the noise. I'm taking you home. Daniel, what are you? Joyce stepped forward, mind racing through 1,000 catastrophic scenarios. You need to leave. Now, before they kill you. I know everything. His eyes found hers across the room, and she saw her own sacrifice reflected back in his anguish. I know what you did. I know why you're here. And I'm not leaving without you. Min Jae moved between them, gun leveled at Daniel's chest. You just started a war, Dr. Carter. I hope you understand that. I understand that you're holding Daniel's voice cracked. That you're holding someone I should have protected. Someone I should have loved when it mattered. Joyce felt the words like physical wounds. Not the woman I love. Not even my friend. Just someone he should have loved. Even now, even in his grand rescue, Daniel was motivated by guilt and regret, not devotion. Mr. Park, please. Joyce stepped around Min Jae, positioned herself between the 2 men. Let me handle this. He brought armed mercenaries into my home, Joyce. Min Jae's voice was lethal calm. That's not a conversation. That's an act of war. Daniel, you need to go. Joyce kept her voice steady even as her world shattered. You can't be here. You don't understand what you've done. The windows exploded inward in a spray of glass and gunfire. The Choi Syndicate, the same family whose assassination attempt Joyce had foiled months ago, had used Daniel's intrusion as cover for a coordinated attack. Bullets ripped through the room. Joyce saw Min Jae return fire, saw June go down with a leg wound, saw one of Daniel's contractors take a headshot. Then she saw the rifle laser sight tracking across the room, searching, finding her chest. Daniel moved without thought, without hesitation. He crashed into Joyce, wrapping his body around hers as they hit the ground. She felt the impact of the bullet entering his back, felt his body jerk, felt warm blood spreading between them. No, 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 no. Joyce pressed her hands against the wound, medical training kicking in even as her mind screamed. Daniel, stay with me. Stay with me. Around them, the firefight raged. Min-jae and his men were systematically eliminating the Choi attackers, but Joyce's entire world had narrowed to the man bleeding out in her arms. She ripped off her jacket, wadded it against the wound, applied pressure with shaking hands. Daniel coughed blood, eyes finding hers with startling clarity. Joyce, I remember. Don't talk. Save your strength. No, listen. His hand found hers, grip weak but insistent. I remember everything. Past life. This life. All of it. His eyes widened with the impossible recognition of someone seeing across timelines. You died because of me. You died hating me. And you came back and sacrificed yourself again. For me. For Mira. For everyone. Tears streamed down Joyce's face. Daniel, please. I loved you. The words came out in blood-flecked whispers. I loved you both lives and I was too stupid to realize it until you were gone. Until you were here, surviving hell, while I played house with someone else. He coughed again, more blood. Come home with me. Please. Let me fix this. Let me love you the way I should have from the beginning. The gunfire stopped. In the sudden silence, Joyce became aware of Min-jae standing over them, gun still drawn, waiting. His face was unreadable, but she saw the question in his eyes. The choice he was giving her. Joyce. Daniel's voice was fading. Come home. Be free. You don't owe these people anything. You don't owe me anything. But I'm begging you, don't stay in this hell. Not for duty. Not for sacrifice. Come home and let yourself be loved. Joyce looked down at the man who'd finally said the words she'd waited lifetimes to hear. Then she looked up at Min-jae, the monster who'd protected her, who'd given her purpose, who'd learned to see her as something more than a disposable bride. Behind Min-jae, emergency medical personnel were flooding in. She could save Daniel. She could stanch the bleeding, get him to surgery, ensure he survived. But then what? Go home to a man motivated by guilt? Return to a family that had let her go without a fight? Abandon the fragile peace she'd built here, the utility she'd carved from survival? Min-jae. Joyce's voice was steady despite the tears. Let them take him to the hospital. Your hospital. I want the best surgeons you have working on him. Joyce, what are you? Daniel tried to sit up, groaned in pain. I'm saving your life. Joyce pressed him back down, her hands still covered in his blood. But I'm not going with you. What? The word came out broken. Min-jae moved closer, and Joyce felt his presence like gravity. You heard her, Dr. Carter. She's staying. Joyce, no. You can't. Daniel grabbed her wrist with desperate strength. I love you. I finally love you. Doesn't that matter? It matters. Joyce gently removed his hand. It matters that you finally see me. That you finally understand what I did. But Daniel, your love comes 4 months too late. For months of me surviving, adapting, building something here. For months of you being happy with Mira, exactly as I planned. She took a shaking breath. I didn't sacrifice myself so you could rescue me out of guilt. I sacrificed myself so you could live freely. So everyone could live. And what about you living? His voice was anguished. What about you being happy? I am surviving, which is more than I managed in our past life. She looked at Min-jae, saw something complicated in his expression. And I have a husband who's kept me alive when everyone expected me to break. That's not nothing. The paramedics arrived with a stretcher. As they loaded Daniel onto it, he reached for her one last time. Joyce, please. Don't do this. Don't stay with him out of obligation. You deserve to be loved, not just kept alive. Maybe. Joyce stood, stepped back into the space beside Min-jae. But I made my choice, Daniel. I chose this marriage to save you. And now I'm choosing to stay because I'm not the woman who makes decisions based on what men want anymore. I'm the woman who survives. She watched them carry Daniel away, watched him stare at her with heartbroken understanding until he disappeared from view. Then she turned to Min-jae, expecting anger, expecting accusations about the international incident Daniel had caused. Instead, Min-jae holstered his gun and asked quietly, "Did you want to go with him?" "It doesn't matter what I wanted. It matters to me." He studied her face, this man who'd tested her, threatened her, and ultimately protected her. "You could have left. I wouldn't have stopped you. I was giving you the choice." Joyce looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she'd never expected to find in Min-jae Park's dead eyes. Respect, trust, and underneath it all, something that looked dangerously like care. "I know," she said softly. "That's why I stayed." The moment stretched between them, heavy with everything unspoken. Then Min-jae did something unprecedented. He took her blood-stained hand, held it carefully, and said, "Thank you. Not for staying. Not for choosing him. Just thank you. For surviving. For being strong enough to make an impossible choice. For not breaking when every other woman would have shattered." Joyce's tears finally fell freely. "Will he be okay? My surgeons are the best in Seoul. He'll live." Min-jae paused. "Do you love him?" "I did. For so long I did." Joyce looked at their joined hands, his fingers careful around her trembling ones. "But I think I finally learned the difference between loving someone and needing to be loved by them. Daniel's love came too late. Yours was never promised, but you gave me something better. You gave me respect." Min-jae's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through his usual coldness. "Joyce, don't." She squeezed his hand. "Don't make promises now. Don't tell me things you'll regret. I chose to stay because it's where I need to be. Not because of love. Not because of duty. Because I built something here, and I'm not ready to abandon it for a man who only sees me now that I'm gone." Min-jae nodded slowly, understanding in a way she suspected Daniel never would. "Then we continue. As partners. As husband and wife," Joyce finished. "In whatever way that means for us." They stood there in the aftermath of violence, covered in blood and glass, having survived an attack that should have killed them both. And for the first time since she'd walked into this compound 4 months ago, Joyce felt something other than fear or determination. She felt peace. Joyce has made her choice, but Daniel's sacrifice has changed everything. Can she live with choosing duty over love? And what will Min-jae do now that he knows she stayed by choice, not obligation? Subscribe now, because the final chapter will determine whether Joyce's sacrifice brought redemption or just delayed the inevitable. Some choices echo through lifetimes, and this one will define them all. Joyce found Daniel 3 days later in Min-jae's private hospital, recovering from surgery that had saved his life by millimeters. The bullet had missed his heart, collapsed a lung, and left him with scars that would remind him of this moment forever. She stood in the doorway watching him sleep, this man she'd loved across 2 lifetimes, and felt something finally break free inside her chest. She entered quietly, pulled a chair beside his bed, and waited for him to wake. When Daniel's eyes opened and found her, they filled with hope so desperate it hurt to witness. "Joyce, you came. Does this mean?" "I came to say goodbye properly." She took his hand gently. "And to give you something you gave me in our past life." "What's that?" "Forgiveness." Joyce's voice was steady, though tears tracked down her face. "I forgive you, Daniel. For not loving me when it would have mattered. For choosing Mira. For dying with her name on your lips instead of mine. I forgive all of it, because holding on to that anger is what destroyed us before." She squeezed his hand. "You don't owe me love out of guilt. You don't owe me rescue out of regret. You're free. I don't want to be free of you." His voice broke. "Joyce, I finally understand what you mean to me. How can you ask me to let that go? Because your understanding came too late for us, but it's not too late for you." Joyce reached into her pocket, pulled out a small velvet box. "Mira called yesterday. She's been sick with worry about you. She loves you, Daniel. The way I used to love you. Completely, desperately, without conditions." She placed the box in his hand. "This is the engagement ring you would have given me in another timeline. Give it to her instead. Build the life I sacrificed everything to make possible." "And what about your life?" Daniel's tears finally fell. "What about your happiness?" "I'm learning that happiness and survival aren't the same thing. And right now, survival feels like enough." She stood, leaned down, and pressed a kiss to his forehead, benediction and farewell. "Live, Daniel. Love Mira. Have children. Build the family you always wanted. And sometimes, when you're happy, remember that someone loved you enough to walk into hell so you could have heaven." Joyce. "Goodbye, Daniel Carter. In this life and the next, I release you from every debt, every obligation, every should have been. You're free." She walked to the door, paused without turning back. "And so am I." She left him there, crying in a hospital bed, holding a ring meant for a future that would never exist. And Joyce felt lighter than she had in 2 lifetimes. The peace treaty took 6 months to negotiate. Joyce sat at the table between Min Jae and her father, translating terms, managing cultural sensitivities, ensuring that Daniel's catastrophic rescue attempt became instead a bridge between families. The Williams empire gained trade routes. The Park family gained legitimacy. And Joyce gained something she'd never expected, a voice that people listened to. Her father tried to apologize once, in a private moment after signing the final documents. "Joyce, I should have fought harder to keep you home. I should have. You should have loved me as much as you loved Mira," Joyce said without anger. "But you didn't, and I've made my peace with that. Don't apologize now. Just go home and be the father to her that you never were to me." He left looking older, smaller, carrying guilt that Joyce no longer needed him to resolve. Some debts, she'd learned, could only be forgiven, never repaid. The years that followed were not the fairy tale people expected, but they were real. Min Jae kept his word. He protected Joyce, respected her intelligence, gave her space in his world. They never had children. Joyce's body had been damaged by stress and trauma in ways that made pregnancy impossible, and neither of them grieved what they'd never wanted. But they had partnership. They had late-night conversations about philosophy and power. They had moments of unexpected tenderness. Min Jae bringing her tea when she worked too late. Joyce stitching his wounds after territorial disputes. Both of them building something that looked less like love and more like profound understanding. Min Jae never asked about the nights Joyce cried silently in their shared bedroom. Never demanded explanations when she stared out windows toward a country she'd left behind. He simply held her when she needed holding, gave her space when she needed distance, and loved her in the only way a man like him knew how. Faithfully, protectively, without conditions. "Do you regret staying?" he asked once, years into their marriage, after a particularly difficult negotiation with rival families. Joyce considered the question carefully. "I regret that staying was necessary. I don't regret the choice itself." She looked at him. "Do you regret that I stayed?" "Every day I'm grateful." Min Jae's honesty was brutal and beautiful. "And every day I wonder if I'm stealing a life you should have lived elsewhere." "You're not stealing anything. I gave it freely." Joyce took his scarred hand. "We're both broken people who found a way to be broken together. That's not nothing." "No," he agreed softly. "That's not nothing." 23 years Joyce lived in Seoul. 23 years of being Min Jae Park's wife, partner, and the woman who'd survived what no other bride had survived. She became fluent in Korean, learned the intricate dance of Mafia politics, earned respect from men who'd initially dismissed her as a disposable token. And when Min Jae died, not violently as everyone expected, but quietly in his sleep after a short illness, Joyce sat beside him and held his hand until the end. "Thank you," she whispered as his breathing slowed. "For seeing me. For respecting me. For never asking me to be anything other than exactly who I was." He'd smiled then, squeezed her hand weakly, and said his final words. "You were the only woman strong enough to survive me. I was honored to be survived by you." Then he was gone, and Joyce was alone again. She returned home to America at 53, grayer and harder, and carrying scars no one could see. Her father was dead. Mira and Daniel had married, had 3 children, built a medical practice together. They'd lived the life Joyce had orchestrated, and from what she heard through mutual acquaintances, they'd been happy. Daniel reached out once, sent a letter asking to meet. Joyce declined. Some chapters needed to stay closed. She bought a small house near the coast, far from family businesses and past obligations. She spent her days reading, gardening, learning watercolor painting, all the things she'd never had time for while surviving. She was alone, but she was not lonely. She was scarred, but she was not broken. On her 60th birthday, Joyce sat on her porch watching the sunset and thought about the girl she'd been in 2 lifetimes, selfish in the first, self-sacrificing in the second. She thought about Mira, who'd lived because Joyce chose differently. About Daniel, who'd learned to love too late but had loved nonetheless. About Min Jae, who'd learned to love at exactly the right time in exactly the right way. And she thought about herself, the woman who'd walked into hell twice, survived both times, and finally learned that redemption didn't require self-destruction. It required choice. It required agency. It required deciding that your survival mattered as much as anyone else's happiness. A package arrived that evening. No return address, just a note in familiar handwriting. from Daniel. In case you ever wonder if you mattered. Inside was a photograph. Daniel and Myra's family at Christmas. 3 beautiful children laughing. And in the background, hanging on the wall, a large portrait of Joyce from her younger days. Underneath the photo, Daniel had written, "We tell them about you. The woman who loved us enough to set us free. The woman who taught me what real sacrifice looked like. You mattered, Joyce. You always mattered. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for what you gave us, even though you should never have had to give it." Joyce cried then, not from regret, but from release. She'd spent 2 lifetimes carrying the weight of other people's happiness. She'd destroyed everything in the first life and saved everything in the second. And now, finally, she could rest. She was alone, but she was whole. She'd paid her debts, earned her respect, survived her hell, and emerged unbroken. Some might call it a tragedy. The woman who sacrificed love for duty, who chose survival over happiness. But Joyce Williams knew the truth. She hadn't sacrificed herself. She'd saved herself. She'd rewritten her own story. She'd chosen agency over victimhood, strategy over surrender, survival over simple happy endings. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything. The end. Joyce's story proves that sometimes the strongest choice is the one no one expects. Choosing yourself by knowing exactly what you're worth. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Joyce's impossible decisions, if you believe that survival is its own form of victory, then share this story. Because somewhere, someone needs to know that you can walk through hell and come out the other side. Changed, scarred, but unbroken. Some stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with "I survived," and that matters. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending of all.